Hey guys, so in this tutorial we are going to talk about Python function. So basically the objectives is to really talk about everything we need for Python functions. So we are gonna start out with slowly with how to create a function, why creating a function, and how to write a function. Then we're gonna go through some of the building blocks of creating a function, for example the def keyword, pass keyword, and then we are gonna learn how to execute functions, and then we're gonna talk about parameters, arguments, um, and then keyword arguments, and then default arguments, and then args and corgs. So even though it seems unfamiliar at the moment, but as we go along in the during the tutorial, everything should make sense. And I'm gonna keep giving examples, and we're gonna use a lot of examples to try to make sense of all the bits and pieces here. So once we go to args and then corgs, and then we're going to talk about types of functions, and after that we're going to talk about scope, local variable, global variable, and then at the end of the tutorial we are going to talk about uh, we how we should document a function, because it's an important step in professional coding, to be able to document your function in a way so that it's easily approachable or easily understood by your peers. Alright, so before we get into the coding, if you want to know how to install Python or how to set up Jupyter environment, I will have a link on the top right here, so you can check it out. But yeah, so let's get started. So here I'm just gonna jump right in. So the way we write function is that we start with this def keyword, and then we just write a descriptive name for a function. So let's say we are trying to get some name, or we're trying to write a function that is accessing some name. So we could say something like get name, and then we go like this, open and close parenthesis, and then we do the colon here. So this get name, the way I wrote it is that I used lowercase everywhere, and in between words I used this underscore. So this is called snake casing. So and this is the Python's this is the Pythonic way to write function. So so once I do that, if I press enter, we have an indentation here, right? So here, so whenever we see this indentation, that means we are within this function. We are within the definition of this function. We are writing this function, and whatever we write here at this point, that is a part of this function. So now we can write something like print, we could say my name is something, right? And I'm just gonna use the f string here. Let's just not use f string for now. Let's just, I don't know, do something really simple. Let's do greeting, and then we could say hello there, something like that. So this is super simple, right? So once I press shift enter, it runs this cell successfully, and we just wrote our first function. So once we are done writing our function, we need to call on this function, and the way to do it is by writing the function name and then use this open and close parenthesis. So once I do that, we could see that the function just executed. Alright guys, so now that we wrote this function, we wanna change the name here from greeting to, let's say, my car, and then I'm gonna do model as parameter and brand as parameter, and then I'm gonna say my car is brand model, and I'm just gonna use f string here. And guys, if you guys don't know how to use f string, please follow my tutorial on the top right here somewhere. I have another tutorial where I explained f string and all other string methods that are that you may find handy. Alright, so now that I wrote this function, alright, I need to use the quotation mark here, and then now if I wanna execute this, I need to put two arguments for these two parameters. So I would say Mustang and then Ford, and the output. So now if I were to make this function more readable, I could write it this way, right? So so these arguments, Mustang and Ford, it's basically here for these two parameters, right? So why not just write it this way? So this is more readable, but you can choose to do either way, this way, or or the previous one where we do it this way. Either way works. Now let's say we wanna have a function where the default argument is Ford, or let's say we are let's say the people who are going to use this function, most of them are American and they love their car, or they love their American brand, so they're gonna wanna use Ford or something. So they're so in that case, by default, if the name of the brand is not given, let's say we want this function to output Ford, right? So that's the idea of default argument. So if by default, so we are saying that if the brand name is not given, by default it will be some argument. So here, in order to execute that, we would do something like this. So what this does is that if we don't provide our brand name here, we still get the same output when I execute this. So oops. So I think we could just leave it like this. Oh, we even though we wrote the function, we didn't execute it. So once we execute this, even if we could do this, it should still run fine, right? So by default it's getting brand name as Ford, and then once we pass in Mustang for model parameter, the function gets executed like this. Now let's say someone is driving driving a BMW or Mercedes or something. So in that case, we would say model is BMW M4, and then brand is BMW. So once we execute this, our output would be something like this, right? So it's getting the brand name instead of default argument as Ford brand. We are writing the function as writing the function where the brand is BMW and model is M4. Okay, so Alright, so we talked about key arguments, we talked about default arguments. Now let's talk about args and quargs. So you may ask what they are. I think for that we need to write a different function. So I'm gonna write a function here. Let's say multiply, and I wanna multiply some numbers, right? So I wanna, let's say, multiply two numbers. So I would say number 1, number 2, and then I would do actually let's not go to return, let's do print number 1 times number 2. Okay, so if I do multiply here, 2 times 2 and 3, I get this print output. I get the output as 6, which is correct, right? But let's see, if I were to save this in a new variable called result, I should be able to see it here, right? But I don't see anything. You may wonder why. That's because we are not returning anything in this function. We are just outputting it in the console. This print function, it outputs the whatever is in there in the console. It's not returning us anything. In order to get the output or get the result returned to us from a function, we wanna use something like return, like that. So once I rewrite this function, and if I execute this, and now if I execute this column, this cell, we see that the result is outputted as 6, which is correct. Okay, so as you can see, there are two types of function, right? You have some function that print something, and then some function that returns something, right? So these are the two different types. So you could see that there are two ways to write function, but I think you get the point that it makes sense to use return to get the output, because at the end of the day you are automating things using programming, right? You want to get an output and make it useful for the next available cases. So which is why you want to use return. Alright, so going back to the functions, and let's say we have, instead of multiplying two numbers, we wanna multiply three numbers. So how do we do that? So one way to do is to add another parameter here, because if we don't add it, and if we just add another argument here, this is gonna give us an error, right? It says multiply takes two positional arguments, but three were given, right? So that's correct, right? So we are providing three arguments, but the function itself, I'm just gonna get rid of this. The function itself only takes two positional arguments. So it seems like we need to rewrite this function. Okay, let's rewrite it. Okay, and then let's do the same thing. Alright, so we just rewrote the function. So now it works. But you see how it seems like there is something wrong. It seems like we are writing something that's redundant. And what if we need to provide four arguments? And what happens then? Are we going to rewrite this function again? So that seems like there is something wrong, which is true. So in that case, we could use something like this, and then what we can do here is that once we use this start sign and then use this parameter, and then this becomes a collections. This becomes a collection type, and we can iterate through this variable here. So here, if I do for instead of number, I should call it numbers, and then here I would say numbers. Let's say I'm just gonna print it for now. I could do print num. So my function I just wrote this function. So here, let's see if I could run this. So I said whenever we use the start and then this variable, we can plug in any numbers we want, any amount of numbers. So let's say we have these 3 numbers, and if I execute this function, we see that it's printing out all these numbers one by one here. So one thing that we are getting right is that we don't need to keep writing parameters again and again and again. We just by using this we can plug in any amount of numbers. So we could do like this, like this, like this, and then okay. So now once we execute it, we see that we are able to provide any amount of numbers in this function. So now what do we do? How do we multiply this function, right? So one way to do is that we could have something like total here as 1, and then we could say total, this incremental, we can use this incremental iteration, and then so what this does, this is, I don't know if, so this is same as saying we are setting this total equal total times number. So what's happening here is that the total is 1 from the beginning, and we don't want to set it to 0, because if we set it to 0, any number we multiply with 0 becomes 0. So we want to have it as 1, and then here we are going to iterate through this collection. So this is a collection type now, right? So we can iterate. This is iterable. So we can iterate through all these. We can iterate and we get all these values one by one. And these number here, what we are doing is that when we come to this loop here, after the first loop, we have this number as 2. And what this does here, after the first loop, here we are multiplying 2 with the total 1, and the output becomes 2, and we set that 2 to the variable 2. So in this, after this, and then this iteration ends, and then in the second iteration the num variable becomes 3 here, and then we multiply 3 with the previous 2 here. So it seems like I don't want to go into more depth here, but you sort of get the idea. If you want to find out more about for loop, I will have the tutorial link posted on the top right. So once the loop ends, we can return the result as total. And so if I execute this now with this 3, we see the output as 24. Okay, so now instead of number, let's say we can have any variable name here. We can have something like this. We can have num, we can have my name, anything. But the Pythonic convention is to use args. And we also wanna, change this here. So there is your args. Now let's talk about quargs. So what is quargs? Quargs is basically when we want to use key value pair. Let me write a function here. So let's go back to this function, right? Let's bring back this function. So I have my car. Let's say so what are some of the description of a car, right? So I could say, my car, let's write about some of the description, right? Let's say the brand of my car is Ford, and then model is Fusion, and then year is 2017, and then color is black. So I have these key value pair, and how do I, and let's say I don't remember some of the other details, right? Like VIN number, right? Like the VIN number, I don't know that at the top of my head, and I don't want to put it there. So for now I'm just limited to these 4. And how do I put all those in a function? In that case, we use something like to start, and then any value here, right? And then if I return this, actually let's do values. So what this is gonna do here is that it's gonna, now we have the we have the ability to write all this, and we have the ability to write all this here. So once we write this, we get this key value pair here. So once we write this, we get what this function does, it returns whatever we input here, but we have to have it in a key value format. If we don't, it's probably gonna give us an error right now. Yes, it will. But there are ways to not get an error like that. So in order to not get an error, we could use the args step we just learned, right? So if we do that, now instead of returning the value, we can also return args. So here we are returning args, which is this tuple of one value. I think we should put something else as well. I don't know, temp argument. So whenever so when you do it this way, whenever we don't have a key value pair like that, it gets it becomes a part of these args here. These arguments, these 2 arguments, they are part of the args here. So what happens here is that once we execute it, these two arguments that are not key value pair, they become part of a tuple, and all the ones that are key value pair becomes a dictionary of key value pairs. Okay, so we have talked about how to create a function, how to set the parameter, how to provide arguments, what are the key arguments, and then we talked about default arguments, we talked about args, we talked about quargs. Alright, so let's talk about function scope. So what is scope in function? So let's say we have a variable, let's say my car, anyway, let's say my var is hello there. Now so this, I think it would be better if I, instead of doing it in Jupyter Notebook, if we just do it in, Visual Studio Code. So I am just gonna bring Visual Studio Code here. So alright, so let's say I'm gonna zoom in just so we can see it clearly. Let's say I have this variable, my var is hello there. So I have nothing here. So this variable here, it is a global variable because it can be accessed from anywhere. So let's say if I have this function, I'm gonna name it my temp func, and let's say it prints out this my var. And once I execute this, so if I do my temp func, and then now if I run this function, right, tutorial, I get this output hello there. So which means that this function, this variable is also available within this function. But what if I have something that's here, let's say it's this, my, actually what if I have this guy, right? What if I have it like that, and then in this line I am trying to print my var. So you see that there is this line here, it's saying my var is not defined, and we're getting this error from Pylons. Anyway, so what this is saying is that we don't have, or Python doesn't know what this var is, what this my var is. That's because this my variable, my var, this variable is only available within this function. It's not available outside of this function. And whatever is within this intended line, it's a part of this function, as we talked about. So my var is only available within this function. So it's, in other way, we are saying my var is available within the scope of this function, where before we said that if my var was, here, we are saying that my var is available within the scope of everywhere. It's a global variable. So the scope for this my var variable is pretty much everywhere, right? So that's pretty much what scope is. Alright, so now that we have talked about multiple things, we talked about pretty much everything in this list that I shared with you guys in the beginning of the tutorial. So let's talk about how we can document function. So let's write a function that I wanna, sort of work with. Anyway, I'm just gonna write it down here. Okay, so I'm gonna write def my car, and then I'm gonna have this model, and then brand equals Ford, and then return, I'm just gonna return a string, and I'm gonna say my car is a Ford, and then model, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm just writing what we just learned. But what if this is something not this simple? What is this is a function that is super complex and we don't know what this one line means? So in order to help out the next person or next developer understand the function easily, we use something like docstring. So docstring should read as if you're telling the function what to do. So the docstring could be return a formatted string. Yeah. So and we can also go and if this is like more complex, right? So if this model, let's say we need to document, it's better to document what all these parameters are for. But now we know what these are for because it's obvious. But if it isn't obvious, we would have document what this model or what this brand, what each of them stands for, right? For example, if you worked with Pandas, you know that actually let me take you to, let me just import Pandas. So alright, so Pandas is here. Actually import Pandas as PD, and then if I do read and then C as V, and if I do shift tab, you see how you have all these, okay, so you see how you have all these options here, right? You have all these options, and you have this docstring, and then you have this one line that telling you what this function is doing, right? So and then you have parameters, and you have all these descriptions. So that is the way to write function description, right? So if let's say we were to do something like that, how would we approach it, or how we can use this format? So there are multiple types of format available, but we are gonna talk about the one that we like best. But for now, let's just say there are these 4 types, like Google document styles, and then NumPy styles, restructured text styles, and AP text styles. But we are gonna work with this NumPy style, and there is a package that we are gonna use to automatically format some of this stuff, which is Pyment. And if I come here, and so I have here, I'm just gonna maximize this a bit more, and if I do ls, I have like an environment variable here. If you guys don't know what this pip file and pipfile.lock, I wouldn't worry about it. So this is just package manager for me to isolate and an environment to run code on. So I'm just gonna activate it, pip and shell. By the way, if you guys want to learn more about the pip env, I would have a link on the top right for you guys to follow. Okay, so I'm just gonna clear this, and like I said, I have this, we're gonna use this Pyment module to document our function. So we're gonna document this function, my car. I said my card. Come on, man. So we're gonna document this function, and in order to document it, we're gonna install. I have it installed, but I'm just gonna install it, show you guys how to do it. I'm pretty sure you guys know. So since I have it installed, it would say something like requirement already satisfied, and I could see that by do pip list. So I have this Pyment here, and I don't have a lot of other things going on because my environment is isolated. And so how do we use this module, this payment module, right? So the way it reads is that we are gonna we're gonna write payment in the console, and then we're gonna use this flag W is for overriding, and then we're gonna use this O, which stands for the string type, which is basically stands for which are the document type we are gonna select. And then after we do O, we're gonna do numpy doc, and then we type tutorial. We type the name of the file. Alright, so sorry. Alright, so I'm gonna go back to this file here, and once I execute this code, you will see that you will see that this file here, tutorial.py, and there will be a change, and there will be a formation change here. So pay attention here, guys. So I'll do payment. I'm gonna execute this code. So I'm pressing enter now. So you see how we got these parameter, and then model, and then brand, and then it says default value is Ford, returns, and then type. So that was done by executing this command, and which makes our life so much more easier. So now here we could say something like return a formatted string, but we're not gonna get the suggested one. And then in parameter model, right after here we are gonna want to put the type that we are expecting our function to receive. So it would be string, and then brand here, it would also be string, and it says optional. We want to do that because if I don't plug in brand here for Ford, so when I'm running this function, right, if I do my car, and then if I do model Ford, I wouldn't have to give the brand name here. I'm just gonna zoom out a bit so you guys can see the whole screen. Alright, so that's how we sort of document function. But if you guys want to learn more about Python or a NumPy document format, we can always search Google. So I just I was just looking for this. So this is the style guide for NumPy. So basically here, if I were to go here and says NumPy doc, and then press enter, and then style guide, and then here you have pretty much all the info you need for documenting functions. Alright, so that's pretty much what I have, guys, for today. If you guys like this tutorial, please subscribe and like the video, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Thank you. Bye.